Welcome back. Most people know of Harriet Tubman as an abolitionist, as she was, but outside of her work to free the enslaved, she was like most black women, multifaceted. Still, her work as the leader of the Underground Railroad will forever solidify her as an American icon and a global one. The Harriet Tubman Home Incorporated is an independent not-for-profit established by the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church to manage and operate the home of Miss Harriet Tubman. The Harriet Tubman Home is charged with sharing Harriet Tubman's core values with visitors through a guided tour of her property. And joining me to share more and give us some insight, I'm joined by the president and CEO of the Harriet Tubman Home, Ms. Karen V. Hill, and good to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
You're here. I think this is the first time on this platform. I think we've had you on others, but glad to have you here on the social justice and glad to have this conversation.
I'm in the right place.
You're in the right place.
And this is the right time.
It is the right time. And so when we talk about Harriet Tubman, obviously her work as one who really fought to free slaves, and not just free slaves, was really about making generational impact. But I want to talk from that social justice component just from the outset, right? Because when we see Harriet Tubman, we're often put her in a box. But the reality is, before there was ever this quote-unquote social justice initiative, she was all about that life.
Right. Social justice was one of her core values. Okay, she had 7 core values: faith, freedom, family, community, social justice, equality, and self-determination. So I think a lot of what you provide to the community in exploring various issues relate back to Harriet Tubman's core values. And we give guided tours of her home, of her property, but then that's 32 acres. And so that begs the question of, how did a woman who could neither read nor write, born a slave, get to the point where she freed herself, her self-emancipation, that's an important principle, and then acquire 32 acres of land on which she built not only her homestead, but a home for the aged. And we're still grappling socially with how we care for seniors as they age. How do we treat people with dignity? An infirmary on the property where, even though she was discriminated against, her infirmary was open to both blacks and whites, and it was free.
Right. So let's back up for a minute. So somebody may not be so familiar, doesn't understand. Harriet Tubman does more than just free slaves. She has 32 acres of property on her own, and now this property is under the auspices of the Harriet Tubman Home, which is also connected with the AME Zion Church. And the AME Zion Church now is the one that's really responsible through the Harriet Tubman Home of really making sure that now her 32 acres are taken care of.
Right. So we're a national park. Okay. That was a strategic focus of the board to make sure that Tubman's legacy lives on in perpetuity. So becoming a national park was very important to us. Became a national park January 10th, 2017, right on time, right before the change in administration and change in so many policies. But so we've protected the land, we've protected the property, we're making improvements on the property. And, it's important that people understand the freedom component of the AME Zion Church as it lives through the work on the property of Harriet Tubman. And what's really important, what I like about your show, Daren, is that you constantly show how people activate their freedom, because that's what Tubman said. You have to activate your freedom. You have to use it in many different ways. She was a suffragist. So she knew that even though she might not get the right to vote, because when women got the right to vote, it didn't include black women and women of color, but she knew that that was an important part of expanding their franchise of the vote. And we're still battling that. We're still fighting right now to not have voter suppression and everything else occur. She knew that owning the land was, in New York State, you needed to own land in order to be eligible to vote. That was one of the reasons she made a point of becoming a property owner, because then you had a voice. Okay.
And let's talk about that voice for a minute, because you, as the Harriet Tubman Home, have a job of really amplifying the voice of Harriet Tubman in the fact of letting people know the home exists, the work that she's done, and really taking that legacy and making sure that America and the world knows that. So give us a little bit about what goes on at the Harriet Tubman Home throughout the course of the year.
Well, every week, 5 days of the week, we provide tours to the public. And we have a really engaged public that comes, from school-age children. More than 50% of our visitors are school-age children. But we have a lot of seniors that come and everybody in between. During the summer, we have many educators who come, who teach history and women's studies, and they want to know the Tubman story, because before we activated our own freedom in telling Harriet's story, a lot of people were telling the story wrong, quite frankly. So what they do is they come to the Tubman Park and they discover that the real Tubman, the facts of Tubman, are so much greater than the myth of Tubman.
Right.
Okay, and then with that, so we see over 10,000 visitors a year. We're in Central New York, so it's a different environment. It's not an urban environment. She lived on the outskirts of Auburn, which really replicate very much the environment that she grew up in as a slave. It's semi-rural, and it's really important that Tubman had this consciousness that she could have this respect and love for the land and separate that for her absolute intolerance for the notion of slavery. Okay? So when she came north, she wanted something that very much looked like where she came from. And then the value of family. If you come to the Tubman Park, we have a lot of family reunions. Lots of family reunions.
On the grounds.
On the grounds.
Right.
On the grounds. And I feel so wonderful about the fact that now we're in this dynamic where we have many multicultural, multiracial families coming, and they're learning their history. They're learning, these are parents who want to make sure that their children grow up knowing all of their history. And you can leave with a little bit of her legacy. Like, I'm wearing the Tubman stamp, okay? They don't make these anymore, but when we had them, they were real hot for us. And now we have something new and great and wonderful.
Right, and we want to talk about that because there is something new and great and wonderful that just recently happened out in Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, there is the unveiling of the Harriet Tubman coins. They're going to be commemorative coins that the public will now be able to reach and have in 2024. And tell us about this.
Well, on January 4th, we will start taking orders for the bicentennial commemorative coin of Harriet Tubman. So we have a 50-cent piece, we have a silver dollar coin, and we have a $5 gold coin. Now understand, the gold, it's going to cost much more than $5 because it's solid gold. But the important part about the 3 coins is it will allow everyone to have the Tubman legacy in their home that they pass down to generations yet unborn. And there'll be a brief narrative. On the 50-cent piece, it will highlight Tubman's time during the Civil War, and it will have her image on the front and back. On the silver dollar coin, it will highlight her time in bringing people north, bringing people to freedom. And then on the $5 gold coin, it will actually raise up Harriet's 54 years living in freedom in Auburn, New York, and her 7 core values are on the coin itself. And what's really important is that I feel like we have finally, on all the coins, there's certain things you have to have. And one of the things is, in God we trust. And that was so Harriet, because that's whom she trusted with everything. God was her North Star. That's whom she looked to. That's whom she communed with. And so the coins are going to be, they are exquisite. Everyone needs to have one.
How long will they be available?
Okay. This 2024 is the primary target, and hopefully we'll be able to sell them a little bit beyond the Harriet Tubman Home. The U.S. Mint will only be able to sell them in 2024, but we'll be able to sell them a little bit beyond. And they are limited, but I think there's enough for everybody and everybody's family who wants to have that Tubman legacy. So we're going to be working really hard to get the word out, to get families prepared to purchase the coins, and to make it happen.
And also, to be honest with our viewers, that there is a portion of the proceeds that actually are going to the Harriet Tubman Home, and that's something that the government decided they wanted to do, recognizing the worth and the value and the contribution of Harriet Tubman.
Yes, so the U.S. Mint recoups their cost of creating and manufacturing the coins. And then beyond that, there's a surcharge. And the surcharge actually gets shared with the Harriet Tubman Home, Inc. and the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati. So, this is a great, great moment. I'd like to see everyone embrace this notion of just having a coin. And you want the coin because that's your first taste. Okay, that's your first taste. And if everything goes the way I pray that they go and we get out and we all vote in 2024, then we can look for that $20 bill to come on in between now and 2028.
Amazing.
Yes.
And so what's it like for you, obviously, on a day-to-day basis, because you oversee the home and make sure the home is well taken care of. You got the preservation of the home. But then there's also that fundraising component and other stuff that goes on throughout the course of the year. So talk to us about yourself and the work that has to go on throughout the course of the year, because these things just don't happen overnight.
Right. They don't happen overnight. Have to segment myself because first thing in the morning, making sure that everything is all right with the home itself, because we're open to the public. That's like job one. We're coming on to the winter season. We're open year round. It snows in central New York, so we just need to make sure that we are prepared for that. And then engaging the community at different levels, locally, statewide, nationally, is really important. This legislation to get the coin was a consequence of my working closely with the former representative from the area, John Katko, to make it happen. And that's a big part of my job, is to see where there are legislative opportunities and how to make that happen. And then, we are a part of all of the major nonprofit national associations that speak to the importance of preservation. And so I have a big task in front of me to deal with the land further. And I can't speak to it publicly right now, but it is something that is really spectacular. Now, as I engage the public, we now have a picture book coming out that was written primarily by an author in England who is of German descent, who wrote this incredible picture book about Anne Frank, who then approached us about Harriet Tubman, and we saw the similarities. And so that book is coming out in 2024. So I'll be promoting that book nationally and internationally. It is incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's another opportunity for us to fundraise. Um,
Do you find that sometimes we have just put Harriet in a box in terms of she's just the one who freed the slaves, but there was so much more to her life than just freeing the slaves, and I think that education is power. I was just sharing with another professor on one of our other shows about just how the work that goes on.
Yeah, I mean, everybody seems to think that they know her story because, oh, Harriet Tubman, when I was in the fourth grade, I did a book report and talked about how she freed the slaves. Well, number one, that's really great and wonderful, but we get people corrected. Like, she didn't free 5,000 slaves, she freed 70, and then she helped another 70 directly, and then she provided directions for others. So getting the story straight is really important. So that's a big part of what we do. But then we get into, well, how is it that Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass all were members of the Amy Zion Church? Frederick Douglass got his preaching credentials at the Amy Zion Church of New Bedford, Massachusetts. Sojourner Truth changed her name not far from here at the Mother Church, Mother Amy Zion Church, from Isabella Pumphrey to Sojourner Truth. And then we have Harriet Tubman. And I think that thread, we have so many resources in our community that, sometimes I'll go down the block and see 4 or 5 different storefront churches. Okay, we have so many resources in our community that speak to our faith, but we don't activate that faith in every way. It's not inside the church. Your faith is activated outside of the church. And that's what Douglass and Truth and Tubman had in common, that they knew that their faith told them to go out, to make a change, to be the difference, to actually be the difference. So that's a big part of our story. And I hope that we, in the next year or so, we really, in a serious way, begin to make that connection more broadly known. And that becomes another opportunity. I'd like to be able to build a new visitor center on the property, totally respect the men and women of Zion who built the visitor center that is there now, and our public enjoys that. But we need a new state-of-the-art facility, much like your studios. Okay.
We put some work in there, right?
Yes.
Well, and some work has gone into here. Do you feel as though that more and more people are becoming aware of the life and the legacy of Harriet Tubman beyond school people? Because I think that you do a great job also, and I know, of not just educating students, but you do a great job of educating adults, legislators, and the whole 9 yards.
Well, that's really important. If I want her legacy to be taken seriously and to continue, it's important that the power brokers in every sector, in the private sector, legislatively, the big non-for-profits that wield a lot of power, that they truly know her legacy. And I'll be honest with you, I'm somebody, when I walk in the room to speak to Harriet Tubman, my first thing is show a proper respect for this woman, okay? We have very short memories in this country. And while I completely respect the work of Dr. King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, all of our civil rights heroes and sheroes that we can quickly call up, all of them stand on the shoulders of this diminutive woman, barely 5 feet, who made the difference. She changed the mosaic of America. And Frederick Douglass recognized that. He recognized that. He said, Harriet, I have had the privilege of speaking in the halls of the Capitol to Congress, being invited to the White House. He had that great gift of oratory. But he said, if you didn't do the work that you did and that you are doing, the work that I do would not matter, because she provided the empirical evidence of the value of freedom, not just going from the South to the North, but activating that freedom,
Right.
making it happen. That's why she was able to engage with um, um, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the suffragist movement, which was 10 years old when she stepped into it. But she made the difference because she was the one who could go into a lecture hall and speak to black men why it was important for women to get the vote, knowing that Congress, that states would begin to take away the voting privileges from black men as they gave them to white women. But she understood that expanding the franchise of America was incredibly, incredibly important.
Are you finding that more and more people are expanding their palate when it comes to understanding who Harriet Tubman was? Because I think we spend a lot of time, just as I said from the beginning, she's the lady who freed the slaves. But when you start talking about the impact of people, you talk about her during the same time as Frederick Douglass, right? She lived during a contemporary with Frederick Douglass, or which we haven't even talked about, was that there's a connection to William Seward, who's also in Albany, who was responsible for her also being able to get these 32 acres as well.
Right. So, if you come to see her property, you come to the national park. We are a mile and a half on the same street as Seward House.
And William Seward is.
And William Seward, he was Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State. He was the governor of New York State, and he was principally responsible for us purchasing the great state of Alaska, which was called Seward's Folly. But now it's the state with the richest natural resources. So he did us a great, great, great solid, if you will, in purchasing Alaska. But William and his wife, Frances, each of them were born into money, and they were staunch abolitionists. And Central New York used to be like the headquarters for the abolitionist movement. So that had something to do with Harriet making the decision to move there. And the Sewards would welcome Tubman into their home, and she would be an influencer. If she were alive today, she'd be somebody we know. We would know who she is on Instagram. We would know who she is on X. Well, maybe she would have gotten off of X at this time, given the changes that have taken place. But she was an influencer, and she will step into those homes, and really tell people, this is what we need to do to expand the franchise. This is what we need your financial support to expand the franchise. I mean, she lived to be 91 years of age, and she was active the entire time. Understand that when she was in her 80s, like I think 85, 86, she traveled from Auburn to Boston to attend Colonel Shaw's funeral. And she traveled alone. And you know yourself, that's not an easy travel today with all the modern conveniences. But Tubman, she did it. And she did it to honor the man that gave her opportunity to serve in the Union Army. She served as a scout and a spy, because again, nobody thought that this little woman, 4'11", could actually have the intelligence. So they used to speak right in front of her, thinking that she didn't understand what was being said. She was the most effective scout you could imagine. But she was forceful because she led the men. She led the men on the Cumberland River Raid, where she helped to free 750 slaves. Why was that important? Because the North needed, hoped, prayed that many of those slaves would be recruited into the Union Army to fight. Okay? She was the first woman to lead an armed raid. Imagine that. So a few years ago, the Uniform Military Intelligence Division of the Army inducted her into its ranks as a full member because of her ability to function as a scout, spy, and
Let me jump in here and ask this question. Now that you talk about this recent, the award. We talk about the fact of now her coin is coming
Coins
out.
coming out.
Right? We have a national park that's actually named after, this name, the Harriet Tubman National Park. A lot of contributions and a lot of awards and recognition now. Where do you see the future ending up in terms of her legacy? Because there's still so much more work that is being done to preserve and also make people aware of the legacy that she's provided.
Well, if you ask me what is Karen's dream, okay, I would say we definitely need the visitor center, a new visitor center. We want to finish the preservation work on her residence. That's sort of job one. We want to shore up the other buildings on the property, the historic buildings. If you're in the historic preservation work and you're dealing with old buildings, there's always something that needs to be attended to. But I think with the use of technology and that we should be able to communicate with the world through technology and have these centers, if you will, of where there is social injustice and how can Tubman's legacy pour into that and make a difference, where we're educating people, we're a part of the training. One of the important things that happened during the whole pandemic, during that tragic time when George Floyd was killed, we were closed because of the pandemic, but so many young people came anyway to the park, because even though the park was officially closed, you could stand outside of the park and kind of soak it all in. So that tells me that people have a thirst to know what Tubman did, and to, as you heard Dr. Freddie Haynes say, come through. Come through. That's what Harriet wants all of us to do, come through. So I would like us to have come through centers strategically placed in the United States, where we're able to have people come to the Tubman Park. We train them, they go out, and they really influence the community around its priorities. The imprint of the Amy Zion Church is significant in the United States. And that church becomes much more powerful when its dynamic preachers take that message outside of the walls of the church, so that the people know that the Freedom Church is very much alive.
You have in Atlanta, people know in Atlanta, Dr. King, and they've got his visitor center there, and they've got a very wonderful, connected to Ebenezer Baptist Church. I think anybody who's involved in social justice makes that the place where they go. They get millions of visitors, right? When we look at Harriet Tubman, she's on the climb there, and getting there. What's it like for you knowing that when you see a Dr. King Center, that you are the person that's responsible for the stewardship of this great heroine?
Right. So, I have to be realistic. It's really hard to get people to recognize a woman, a woman did this. This woman, that she was not educated, and a woman of color. And we're in central New York. So it's not like we're in the Bronx or in Manhattan or in Atlanta. We're not in a major cultural center. So we need people to come and experience a different kind of life. Okay, and they need to know that in experiencing that different life, they put themselves in the position to be able to go back to where they came from and say, how do I take the lesson of Tubman with me wherever I go? I mean, we have some people who've been there 100 times to visit us. And each time they come, they say they learned something different. Yeah. And a big part of my job, quite frankly, is to make sure that the people who are not genuine, who are not telling the real story of Tubman, that they are diminished as the real story of Tubman grows larger.
I gotta ask a question before we go. What's that like for you, going out to different places, and you see maybe a store with the Harriet Tubman T-shirts or people with the other stuff, and they don't necessarily know the whole story. How much do you get into the fact check and say, I am, and this is what it is?
I do. I do. If you want to get me riled up, first of all, because that's one of the things, anybody can sell T-shirts, but we do have T-shirts that tell the story of Tubman.
Right.
And people should not tell her story, should not be selling her goods if they don't really understand and appreciate who this woman was. I mean, they're going to know who she is, the real Harriet, because she's a force whose time has come. I mean, these coins are going to make a huge difference in telling the story. That $20 bill, the $20 bill is the most ubiquitous form of currency we have in this country, and there's no woman on our paper currency. When that happens, game over.
Person of color, right?
Yeah, person of color. Before you spend that $20 bill, you'll think about what you're spending it on.
Right.
Okay? Are you spending it wisely? Are you saving part of it? Are you helping your family? Those are the things. Are you being charitable? I mean, you'll have that Tubman 20.
Before we go, I gotta get this. I hear people say this all the time, and I need you to correct me. I freed a lot of slaves. I could have freed a whole lot more if they knew. And that was a...
Well, that one, if they knew they were a slave. Well, that one was true, but I did hear Mr. Byron Allen, whom I have great, great, great respect for. He had his Griot Awards on CBS, and he gave a Tubman quote about every dream begins with a dreamer. Harriet Tubman didn't say that. So those are the things that I'm constantly trying to help people honor her, but shape her with her own words.
Last thing I said before we go, she did not have a rifle. She had a...
Well, she had the pistol, and she did have a rifle that belonged to the family, but it was the pistol that she was able to keep in her skirt pocket. And it is true that she never lost anybody on any of her freedom campaigns. And, she would have shot you, because if you said you were going back, you were a liability. They would get the truth out of you.
Right.
And Harriet wasn't going to have that. She was faithful, but she was faithful and realistic.
Karen Hill, CEO of the Harriet Tubman Home, talking about not just the legacy of Harriet Tubman, but really how things are really moving forward with the Harriet Tubman Home. For more information, of course, that was at the bottom of the screen that you can get connected with Karen and the Harriet Tubman Home, I should say.